Hi, everyone. I'm Francesca Maximé, and welcome to Inside Out with Natasha and Francesca. We are here joined again for yet another live show on this Wednesday, August 26th. And we are joined by Dr. Dana Collins and by therapist Lynn Min, both in New York City, where we all hail from. And we're here to talk about Black joy and to talk about the ways in which there's so much creativity and culture and resilience within different communities, as well as some of the pain and the trauma. But I think we all just agreed that we wanted to just take a moment to pause first to recognize that this week we have another shooting of a police shooting of an unarmed Black man, Jacob Blake in Wisconsin, who is alive and paralyzed now. And just pausing for a moment to hold space for, in the middle of the uprising and in the middle of the pandemic and in the middle of what we know to be true with the ongoing issues that we've seen with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, that this is still very current and very alive. So just pausing for a moment to hold space for that. And really just setting our intentions on collective liberation and what does that mean? And as therapists, how is it that we are able to sort of step into using our left brain and our clinical knowledge and all of our acrobatics that we can do there with some of our social advocacy and some of the ways in which we show up in the world outwardly, and then some of the ways in which we can very much do, as this show is, look at ourselves inside out and maybe invite our clients to do that also, so that we can try to unpack the both and the complexity of this issue and these issues in ways that are not just sound bites. These are deep. It's a path that we're on and we're here together. So welcome. I open the floor to my beautiful co-hosts and guests, and really kind of co-hosts, since we've been doing this together for a little while already. It's the Fab Four, as I like to say, the new Fab Four. Or what do they call it? We're the new squad, maybe. The therapist squad. So we're talking about Black joy today. Natasha, do you want to sort of open in terms of what you're thinking about there? Dana, do you have some thoughts? Lynn, who would like to begin the conversation on what does Black joy kind of mean to you? Or what is it, why do we perhaps need it now more than ever? What is it?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of definitions which speaks to the complexity and the wide range of experiences of Black people. But I think recently it's been talked about as a sort of one and the same with resistance. Because, if you think about it, and I don't think you have to think too much about it, but for centuries, ever since Black people have been in this country, the majority has done many, many things to keep Black people down, to keep us oppressed. And so feeling joy as opposed to getting lost in the pain and the suffering and trauma is really an act of resistance. It's a refusal to be overtaken. It's a refusal to be overtaken by the oppression. So that's one way of looking at it, sort of a pushing back.
Mm-hmm. Which to me, as a therapist, makes a lot of sense in terms of the ability that people have to make meaning that then helps them continue on in the face of whatever the challenge or the struggle is that they're dealing with. So the idea of there being, in the case of African Americans and African descended people in the Americas, this kind of larger cultural strategy that people have used and continue to use and develop as a way to kind of psychologically protect themselves from what otherwise could be like a very overwhelming physical, but also emotional, psychological experience. So that the joy itself is like a resistance against this sort of annihilating force that exists internally and externally.
Yes.
And what might be a good example of this? Like I have a few in mind, and we can call up some videos and things like that may sort of point to this. But what would you say is a good example? Does any one or thing or act come to mind?
Yeah, I was reading an article recently, and it basically said that it doesn't have to look like any one thing. It can be this refined, polished thing, maybe organizing an action, or it can be what they said, more scrappy or spontaneous. And I think that's where creativity can be drawn upon. I actually saw on Instagram somebody had put together just a compilation of Black people laughing, just videos and pictures. So it can be something really simple like that, just tapping into these things that we naturally have and inherently feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And Lynn, I see you smiling because I think you have something in mind there that's coming up for you. You want to share?
Dana, what you were sharing just kind of reminded me of Deb Dana's work with the polyvagal theory, where she says, how do we get anybody out of this trauma state, the hypervigilant state, and neurologically, and using our nervous systems, how do we get them to that state of relaxation where actually creativity can flow, right? Well, like if a T-Rex is chasing us, we're not going to be creatively thinking, right? How do we get them out of that survival mode is through play. And how important play. And so it's interesting because I've been kind of introducing play even to my clients as like a survival mechanism. Like, how do we play through this moment where it's so difficult for us? Mm-hmm. And I'm reminded of all the ways that we laugh collectively, or we laugh at certain things together that bring joy. And I was thinking joy, as you were all sharing, joy as survival, not as just like a luxury thing, or if this, like, then we're going to get there, like don't deferring, not deferring it, but like reclaiming it as like, no, it has to be now. Yeah. Joy now as survival, because we need it the most now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's so fun. I mean, like, to think about that, like joy is survival, and joy as a very healthy mechanism for sustainability, for health, for well-being, for social determinants of health, mental, emotional, physical, that this isn't just like, hanging out and, that I think there's a difference between what it means when you talk about joy and really feel joy. Like, what do you think of when you think of joy? Like, I want to say, Brian, I think the first thing on that media list we have is a gymnast. I don't know if you can pull up that video. And for me, this brings a certain amount of joy, and it's a certain amount of this is just an example. And then maybe we can go to the Black Joy Project on Instagram to just sort of show folks what that looks like and sort of what they're curating over there. But just an idea of what I feel in my body, what I feel in my soul, what I feel in my sense, in my essence, is a celebration and an empathy, not even an empathy, a reverberation where like there's a shared joy. And it's interesting because as a mindfulness practitioner, there's one of these things called the four Brahma Viharas, or 4 humble abodes. And one of them is called appreciative joy or sympathetic joy. And it's a collective joy. It's that if there's more happiness here, there's more happiness for me too. It's not a scarcity model where there's like some happiness here that I need to be jealous or envious of. And I feel like this kind of is sort of an old ancient sort of sense of like this collective shared joy piece. And it's specific in this way to Black people. So I don't know, do you have the gymnast video, Brian? Okay, this is just what it does it for me. I mean, one of the things anyway.
And just really quickly while we're waiting, I love, Francesca, that you brought up the point of there's enough for everyone, because I think a lot of oppression is based on the idea that there's not enough. There is a scarcity, so I have to keep it all for myself. So really challenging that idea and realizing that there is abundance, I think makes things less scary for people, and people feel less threatened and open to share.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as you're saying that, we're sort of watching this video simultaneously of this, you know, Mia Dennis video doing her incredible acrobatics that just, you know, that there's something here that just evoked in me that there's obviously so much discipline and dedication and practice for something like this, but it's also kind of like joyful, because I think we've seen, you know, I think of myself like learning classical music and playing piano when I was a kid, and there was no joy there. And yet and yet it took a lot of determination to kind of learn arpeggios, but it wasn't joyful for me. I'm not saying it never is for anyone, but that I look at her, Black Girl Magic, and I'm saying, wow, there's just like something there that's just, I don't know, the energy of the cosmos or something that's just, she's enjoying and letting it flow through her, and it's coming into me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we're just going to take a quick peek at the way in which this has been sort of named. The Black Joy Project is on Instagram. There's been a lot of articles written about this, and we'll share the resources with you also in the links in the chat boxes and whatnot, so you can kind of find them. But if you're on Instagram, just maybe take a look, if we scroll forward a little bit, to just see some of the things that they're curating. And as Dana was saying earlier, there's certainly a lot of just creative and expansion place. And as she said, Black joy is an act of resistance, that it doesn't, it's using the creativity as protest in a way, as persistence also.
How are you guys seeing it now?
Yeah, we're looking at the curated video. We're looking at the Black Joy Project and all of their Instagram posts and whatnot. And so we're just sort of looking at, I mean, there's a lot of smiling, there's a lot of creativity, there's, you know, full out afros, there's, you know, there's all kinds of ways in which, you know, we can celebrate ourselves as full humans and have that be shared. And I know that there was a video of a woman from the UK, I believe, who was talking about it and saying it could be a Basquiat painting, it could be a Fela Kuti piece of music, it could be the way in which that, but that it's that idea. And Lynn, I'm thinking back to something you shared with us before in your performing arts school, when you would hear people saying, and you would just sort of like, there was just something about that was just enlivening for you. Maybe you want to talk about that, and then maybe what that means for you as a person, and then how it applies maybe in a clinical setting in terms of ways in which it might apply there.
I think for me, I think I was lucky to be able to be in a school where I experienced so much art and creativity, and I was the minority with a sea of beautiful Black voices. And for me, there was always a power behind it, right? It wasn't just beautiful because it was just like pretty, but there's like this, like, you know, when singers say, oh, sing from your gut, right? And it's a guttural, but it's honed by like something more. And we all knew, right? I think there was also a thing that vocalists would say, like, oh, that's really Black, right? And it was a compliment. And so it was already kind of celebrated in the way that I grew up and the way I understood music. It had its place even before I could name that this is what that is. And I'm thinking back to like the joy conversations that we've been having right now: sympathetic joy, abundance joy, the model of abundance. And for me, it's also very spiritual. If I think back to like my spiritual role models, they happen to be a lot of Black spiritual role models for me, pastors and you know, and it reminds me of that verse. You know, I grew up Christian, and I became a pastor because I'm a Christian, and you know, the joy of the Lord is my strength. And I kind of it just made me smile, thinking, okay, what did Black people, like in their trials and tribulations, what did that mean for them? And what is that age-old truth and resistance and survival that I carry on, and I've tried to kind of pass on as a pastor even, right? On the pulpit. Yeah, the joy is the strength that that helps us carry on. And what kind of joy did they tap into? And it came from a lot of singing together, you know, again, it's just like, I always imagine this wade in the water, you know, that kind of like that soulfulness that comes, and the communion that comes when we sing together, right? And when we're suffering together, whether it's because of suffering or crying out to a higher being that we all believe in, I think it's so powerful. And some of that is what resonates for me.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's rich. I mean, do you guys have any responses, Natasha or Dana, to what Lynn has shared?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because there is this way in which like the sort of Black spiritual tradition is really something that many people sort of globally connect with and find very powerful. And it's such a big part of how African American culture is understood, sort of in the US, but also globally. And I guess I'm just thinking about how contradictory it is that this coexists, you know, contradictory and also maybe not contradictory, but that this coexists, this kind of almost like a deep appreciation and kind of like a soulful appreciation for, you know, sort of the culture created by African descended people in the Americas coexists with this continued like severe, you know, sort of really perverse anti-Black devaluation, and how in some ways like the only reason we have to talk about Black joy is because we don't just call it joy, because Black people are so still separated out. And so even though of course it makes sense to claim Black joy as Black people, it also then, you know, paradoxically immediately is like recognized by everyone who isn't Black as something that is like important and necessary and needed and wanted, and yet then becomes more vulnerable to this kind of like incorporating into, you know, the way in which Black resistance is consumed. Like there's this kind of real paradox in which it's like hard to appreciate Black joy without at the same time then like kind of, you know, like for people who aren't Black to kind of to take part in Black joy is so contradictory, you know, and yet it does seem like in many ways a very natural act of love that's been going on within, you know, the larger non-Black American culture for Black people. It's like a way that, you know, non-Black people can kind of show love and appreciation for Black people, even in the context of this ongoing anti-Black racism. And I guess my question is, or what I wonder is like how to kind of take it deeper than just like, well, you know, we love you, but we are also oppressing you. Like, how can these two things start to come together more and consciously?
I love that. And what's coming up for me, Natasha, as you're talking is like appreciation versus appropriation, right? Because we see how much it happens when there's sort of this, I'm going to steal your thunder, you know, as opposed to when there's this portal to connection, to human connection, right? That really feels right. And we're going to get to how this applies in the clinical setting and sort of what we can talk more about that with our clients, wherever our social location is, and also whatever their social location is, and sort of maybe seeing where this can be maybe a, you know, we talk about risk and protective factors, and how it might be a protective factor all around. And one of the things Brian's going to pull up is, again, as we're talking about now, the shooting of Jacob Blake in Wisconsin, that these protests have been going on, but that in response to them, there's not just been this idea of folks who are then perhaps engaging in acts of violence, because again, Black rage is also real. Rage is real. White rage is real. Look at Dylan Roof. I mean, look at people. I mean, this is a thing. But that there's joy within protest, there's joy within resistance. So Brian, let's take a look at some candy. integrated into as part of what can serve as the fuel, right? And how can you not smile looking at this? And from a polyvagal theory perspective, like Lynn was talking about earlier, these kind of repetitive, rhythmic, auditory, somatic, and collective pieces are what have been shown for eons, and what the current neuroscience research actually is evidenced in terms of somatic well-being as reparative, as helpful to well-being. And so when you understand this as a both and, then you're just like, well, yeah, why not? And why don't we do more of this all the time anyway?
Yeah, there was actually a recent meta-analysis. Meta-analysis, for those who don't know, is basically when you look at a bunch of studies about a particular topic to see like what the overall picture is. But they came out in 2019, the annual review of public health, and it found things that I think we sort of inherently know, that there is a relationship between well-being and joy and lowered cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which a lot of us know is linked to a lot of things like heart disease, weight gain, depression. So, it just goes to show that we have these sort of inherent things that we can tap into that are really, healing, really healing, and to continually just focus on the pain makes it difficult to do that. And it also doesn't show the whole picture, the whole humanity, because I think a really important part of Black joy is realizing that Black people are complex and there's more to the story than the pain. And, I also sort of think, as I'm talking about this, about the fact that Black people have been dehumanized so much and reduced to animals who don't have, the full range of human experience. So, talking about Black joy is refutes that.
I was, go ahead, Lynn.
Oh, thanks. Dana, as you're speaking, I realized I have a bias towards Black and minority, and also Korean, because I happen to be Korean. If a single mom who's Black walked in, or a single mom who's white walked in, I would just automatically assume that the Black single mother has just gone through so much more. And I know I can understand, like, there's a part of me that's like, that's a prejudice, or like, that's a bias. But I think I've held this unconscious bias for a long time, because there's a part of me that's like, I already believe that Black people are already at higher levels of resiliency. Like, that is just true. In the ways, even spiritually, of like, we come to an order, and then there's like a disorder, whether it's something we can control or not. Some disorder happens to us, and then we need to reorder our lives, and it's like a cycle that keeps going. But again and again with this cycle, we find, where do we find our naivete again? How do we make this, how do we arise out of the phoenix kind of thing again and again and again? And you're talking about people that have been through the fire again and again and again. It's just different. Like, I feel it in my soul level that it's different. And so I have like an, interesting word to talk about this. In the Korean society, we say that when a woman is married and when she has kids, she's like an ajumma. And it's interesting, we kind of look down upon it because ajummas are like ratchet, and like they have no sense of, they have no etiquette, like they'll just talk about anything anywhere, and they'll speak their mind, they have no filter, and they're very like and I don't know why, but the stereotype of ajumma is like lower register voice, and they're bossy, and they're what I mean, but they're also known for their strength. Like they can do anything they put their mind to. They'll go to the market and say, give me that for $1, or like, make it cheaper. Well, how are you gonna, what I mean? Like that archetype. And I just thought about it, how I reject that sometimes, but I also admire it. And I know that that's been part of the way it's been structured in my mind. Like, oh, those people are resilient AF, right?
Mhm.
They laugh out loud. They say for what it is, you know what I mean? And I just thought maybe that's a little bit of what we're trying to tap into. And I thought, oh my gosh, I totally do have this link with like Blackness and Ajumaness. This
Mm.
like say what you need to, express yourself and laugh out loud and this boldness. And I was just sitting there appreciating that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you being able to have that reflection and engage in it and share it, because I think sometimes when we realize that we have these ways of thinking, it's easy to sort of shut them down, but not want to engage with them because maybe we feel, oh, this is not right, or this is shameful, or whatever we think. But to be able to investigate it is really what helps us to move forward.
Yeah, thanks. And Natasha, you were going to say something when Lynn was speaking, because I think that is so interesting what you just added.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm having like a number of reactions. I mean, one, I think what you said, Lynn, is really interesting and really meaningful. And I'm also thinking about like some of my like first marriage in-laws who are Black women who are very proper and very not at all like that, and are kind of and how much like how many variables there are, and how much like Blackness, like any race, is literally, and culture is just literally like it doesn't contain the variation of individual, and yet there is something kind of true also in what you're saying, and how to kind of like incorporate that into our own psychologies without necessarily needing to make that what we expect or want or need from other people, especially as therapists. And then what I was going to say before, but I think it's really related, is that this question of like individual differences versus like the larger sort of phenomenon of Black joy. And like as therapists, like how do we understand what sort of what wellness is? It's so informed by kind of like this larger culture, the dominant culture that we're part of, like the idea of like these sort of more sort of stereotypical ideas of like what is what was the word that you used, Lynn? The ajuas?
Ajumas.
Ajumas, like this idea of being very like kind of forward or loud or, joyful, but also entitled, like that these things are so sort of, there's so much pathology, there's so much pathologizing, and yet these are really like more like mentally healthy ways of engaging in what is like kind of the ongoing challenges of life. Like in some ways, this idea that people are resilient is like, that is very necessary, not just for people who are African descended people in the Americas, but like human beings who go through challenging life circumstances. Like that's what mental health is being resilient and being able to kind of like still be joyful, to hold on to joy despite the fact that life is really kicking your ass, is really what everyone needs to aspire to. And yet it's almost seen as like in this weird upside down world that we live in, it seems as that's actually considered unhealthy. Right. Like, so when someone walks into your office who's been through a lot and maybe has these kinds of like cultural, ways of being that reflect that on a sort of generational level, the idea is like, oh, this person has problems. And it's like, no, this person is actually really well adapted. And this should be, and I think that is an important part of like understanding Black joy as people who aren't Black and therapists who aren't Black, is that when you look at someone and you think, oh, this person has problems, maybe what you're looking at is mental health, and that needs to be something that's much more reflected in like our understanding. And of course, the understanding of everyone who is being pathologized, you know, but I think that's sort of like a place where already people kind of already know that. It's just that it's not reflected in the culture, the dominant culture.
I think too that, you know, Natasha, like, I think you made me realize, like, I think what I can pick out as like the Ajumma factor and also the Black resilience factor is this boldness, not necessarily bold because they're loud, but this boldness, like, I really don't care what you think. I'm going to express and I'm going to stand firm. If I want to be silent, then I will be silent. And I've, you know, and that's very countercultural, like to fit in the box, be nice, like, be like, you know, use your forks, and like, there's a way to do certain things. And then there's like this, like, don't really give a shit.
Yeah. And what's coming up for me, Lynn, as you're saying that, is what I was saying to you guys in the off-cam green room chat, if you will, before we started, which was the Nat Ministry, which is another one of my favorite Instagram accounts. Bishop, whomever, I forget her name. She's amazing. Dana, you said you actually met her once, and I will go back because it's important to give credit where credit is due. However, this person who's created this as rest as resistance, rest as, you know, an opportunity to really to be, you know, not down with the supremacy, you know, oppression ideas, and to take space, is that what you're talking about from a clinical and a therapeutic setting is something that I do all day long with clients, which is limits and boundaries. And that it goes to a place of worthiness often with clients. And then it goes to a place of self-concept around what might it be that I would fear I could lose if I were to actually have a limit or a boundary or a voice, and to learn to articulate it skillfully. So we also work on the skill building piece, but that there is a way to have a limit and a boundary and come into your own full power and ownership. And from that mindfulness perspective that I come from, you know, your dignity and worth as a human. I'm enough and I matter, no better or worse than, but I'm here also and I matter, I count. Right. And to that end, what I hear you saying is that it's just sort of what I like to say is an elegant ferocity. There's a real, like, no, it's not that I don't care about anyone. It's that your opinion of me is less important to me than my need to be able to be my whole self and take care of myself.
I love that.
And that I'm going to be able to do that in such a way that I comport myself in the way that's appropriate to the situation, which in the grocery store, like you're saying, might be being a little feisty in that case, but that you're not necessarily that way when you're rocking a baby to sleep.
Right.
Right?
And I think it also is a comment on the standards. Like those might be your standards.
The tone policing.
Yeah, I mean, who says, where does that come from? Who says that that's right? So it's challenging that too, because I mean, often the societal standards are, you know, steeped in patriarchy, white supremacy, and we don't need to conform to that at all. We shouldn't be conforming to it.
I love that. And earlier, Brian, you can bring up the video now, just because it's as good a time as any, because I just want people to see and notice when you're watching this, how often, depending on your own social location, your ethnicity, your background, your race, how often or not, this is something that's familiar to you. Just notice, and notice what happens inside your body, perhaps, as you're watching this. So Brian, go ahead, roll tape, please. Thanks.
Not that.
We'll be all right. Oh.
Who has the worst edges? A, Stevie Wonder.
Oh, that's already done.
Oh, that's funny.
And maybe check out the next one. See how.
A, Stevie Wonder. B, Naomi Campbell. C. Tamar Braxton.
I told you she was on there. I told you. Did I say Tamar? I told you she was over here.
The point is that there is Black joy, and notice what's happening in your body as you're watching people laugh. Like sometimes we watch cute cat videos because we want to just feel a little bit more calm and regulated in our nervous system or whatnot, or we like little puppies, or my favorite is the otters when they're holding hands on their backs and they're just floating around in the water. I mean, those things like calm me down. But this also can enliven us and make us feel joyful and feel connected. Like I want to be in part of that party. I want to,
Yes.
I want to know what's separating me from being able to share that joy with them. And if there isn't anything separating, how can I be safe enough for those folks if they don't like me, that they would like me to be with them, or that I would even, you know, be allowed to do that, or whatever it is. But I want some of that, and I want to be a part of that, or I want to create that or something like that, because we're all having a good time seeing it.
I just see that Brian has put in the text box, for the record, my edges are the best. So Brian has oh, yeah.
Nice, Brian. You're tight. You're high and tight. Even in COVID, right? You found your way to the barber. You figured it out. And I think that's even an interesting point, is we're looking at the Crown Act. We're looking at these like legalizations to legitimize different Black hairstyles and diversity as a form of joy and creative expression. And I know, Natasha, you mentioned the WAP video, which I won't get into, about Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B. And that's so colorful, right? Like even people like, what's her name there? Roxane Gay, you know, very prolific on Twitter, totally fun to follow. Haitian American author, and the author of books like Hunger, and also a trauma survivor, that she was just saying, oh, it was fun, it was colorful, it was like joyful, you know, even though it was a little bit, in other ways, some people might say is a little bit challenging. And you can find it on YouTube. I mean, we have the link, but I don't know if it's like legal to show, but it is colorful, and there is a lot of creativity there, and a lot of it has to do with hairstyle and outfit and things like that. And how can that be part of Black joy, and how can people understand that more? Because I mean, Natasha, you're the only white woman here. I mean, what's wrong with white people, especially with clinicians, noticing and saying things like, oh, I love your hair, or can I touch your hair, or what's with the hair, or is it like, what's going on there, and how is wearing your hair the way you want to an act of resistance? I don't know if that's even the right question to be asking you, but.
Well, I think it has to do with whiteness more than Blackness in that case, because I think it really has to do with the degree to which, like, you know, like white European descended culture and European descended people have defined themselves against, you know, whatever their sort of perception of what Blackness or Black culture or Black people represent. And so therefore, like, the idea of like there being something outside that is, you know, kind of desirable or attractive or attracting is confusing, dysregulating, upsetting, just like, you know, this kind of idea of like the other. You know, even when it's a person sitting across from you who clearly has more in common with you than not, you know, like, I think people are really, I mean, I guess there's different ways of looking at it. I mean, I think you can say like there's hostility in this question of like, can I touch your hair? I mean, there's nothing, it certainly is experienced that way. But, and I think there is like a way in which like people, you know, white identified people are often kind of disconnected or not connected enough to how sort of hostile and othering their ignorance is, you know. But at the same time, I also think there is a sort of like confusion over why do other people get to have this, what appears to be more creative, joyful, expressive, whatever, you know, and my whole life has been about like cutting that off, like shutting that down, becoming less different. And so when people come in and are kind of more at home in their own difference, I mean, what could be more different than being a Black person, right? I mean, any non, you know, kind of dominant culture person, I guess, is different. And yet the way we conceptualize it in this white way is like the Black is the most different. So like when someone comes in is like totally at home in themselves or just existing, my existence is resistance, like, I think you do see white people get really confused and uptight and say crazy things because I think it does, a craziness comes out. That's what I would say. I think there is like a kind of inherent confusion there.
I think it's also what the thing that just pulled up for me as you were talking about this whiteness is, first of all, I can feel that like, oh, I know I felt that before. And also on the other end, I felt othered before too. And even from my own people, like I don't fit into anything. I'm too liberal for church. You know what I mean? Like I'm too woo-woo for the club. I mean, I just, I don't fit anywhere usually. And yet I feel like the feeling that came up was envy. Like what happens to a person when you start to envy that which you are trying like so hard not to be like,
right.
or
yeah, how confusing.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to say. I think Brian is going to bring up the Crown Act piece just because I want to say again, existence is resistance. And as a television news anchor that I was for nearly 20 years, that whole idea of needing to fit into the box, like we're kind of in this digital video box now, but I was in the pre-digital broadcast box where, you know, I'd be in people's living rooms with nothing to say of the microaggressions that I'd experienced when people would email me and say, you know, I'm watching you on the 11 o'clock news and like touching myself or something, because that piece is, oh yes, you know, like that would happen often, or, you know, wear your stockings and things like that. So again, the hyper fetishization and objectification around me as this sort of mixed ethnic kind of other interesting kind of being that's sort of not quite, you know, an object of desire and intrigue and exotic, right? Which means other, means non-native, means foreign to, that's what the word means. And all of that, but that I couldn't wear my hair the way it is now. I had to have it be in a particular kind of straight sort of highlighted, blown out, you know, whatever way that ruined my hair. And then I had to wear extensions and I had to wear wigs and I had to wear all these other things where women are paid pennies in Asia to have us import hair and then weave it in, which is its all complexity there also. Because again, all of this is structural, this is social, this is economic, this is about being a woman, this is gendered. But all of that is to say that this Crown Act, which we're going to look at right now on Instagram, is about the celebration of legalizing hairstyle of whatever your choice is without having it be a policy code that you know, are against. That there's, you know, employers and schools and, you know, because we see this in schools, you've seen people cutting off, you know, young men dreadlocks and things like that in celebration of Black hair as a part of not only existence as resistance, but of Black joy. Did we? Yeah, we saw that. And so just to me, I don't know, do you have anything to say about that in terms of, you know, how hair and expression and clothing and all of those things are or can be part of the artistry of, or nails, you know what I mean? The part of the artistry of everyday Black joy that perhaps I feel like in some ways from the lens of, as Natasha, you say, whiteness kind of gets, like I've often felt sometimes like I'm the bearded lady at the circus for people. You know what I mean? Like I become this object of like curiosity.
Yeah.
And that how that, and yeah, I don't know, Dana, you're nodding. Does that?
Yeah, because a lot of it, you know, you're talking about hair, clothing, nails, a lot of it is seen as very other. So it becomes a thing of curiosity and sort of reduced. You know, as this novel, fun, interesting thing. And I think when that kind of thing happens, that kind of othering, some dehumanization can happen because you're not really seeing it for fully what it is. And, you know, to the point about, can I touch your hair? I've never understood. Well, I mean, I understand that I understand that there's a curiosity. I don't, but it has always felt to me like, well, no, I'm not like a little dog or a pet or something. Why would you think that you can touch my hair? But, you know, I think the fact that, you know, Black women particularly, and also Black men have been increasingly embracing our natural hair and becoming more creative with it. I mean, I think more people are wearing locks. There are different styles of braids now. I think we are feeling more and more sort of, I don't want to say permission quite, but we're saying that there are options beyond these Eurocentric standards. This is a way of expressing myself and my Blackness.
Mm-hmm.
And as a clinician, how do you take note of that, you know, and be really present if your client is expressive in that way, if you're noticing that something about you is othering about that in some way, even if it's out of a curiosity or an admiration or anything. Does that make sense?
So the question is about taking the role of a clinician, or?
No, I was sort of opening it up to Lynn and to Natasha also, to just sort of say, if, you know, if you're noticing, like, what would you recommend to therapists? You know what I'm saying? If they're noticing that, do you understand? Like, a client does that make sense? My question now?
For sure. I mean, you know, one thing I was thinking, you know, because there is this history among European descended people of chattel slavery, of taking. And so, you know, I think that white people have to be very aware that whether or not they think that this is where they're coming from, that it can come off as if like, you are something that I am entitled or have the right to touch.
Yes.
And that there may be a very internalized sense of like, it's okay to be in other people's space, in other people's bodies, like that this is not, you know, to whatever extent that may be part of our experience as European descended people, intergenerationally, what have you, like this is the history. And so like, none of this is happening outside of this historical context. And so I'm always like thinking about like not wanting to violate other people's boundaries, you know, and maybe in some ways having been raised a little bit like that it is okay to violate other people's boundaries. And also like, you know, within, and I don't know if this is fair to say with just about European descended culture in America, that there's a lot of violating of boundaries that goes on within families. And so people may take that out into the world and, you know, just be acting that way with people who may interpret it as being more than just like, oh, this is how we did it in my family. We touched each other's hair. I don't know. Like there's just ways in which, you know, it's the more you understand about the sort of cultural history, the more you can kind of be aware of what other people may be thinking about what you're doing. And that's true for everybody, but especially I think for European descended Americans, because there's such a deep, deep history that is sort of not taught. So you really have to educate yourself because other people know the history. You're the only one who doesn't know the history. You know what I mean? And so as a clinician, I think like if you have clients who are African-American, African descended, or who are, and you're white and they are from other cultural groups, like you just have to be very sensitive that you don't know what people are bringing and what they're receiving from you, even if you're not necessarily, you know, sort of consciously or unconsciously even putting it out there. So like I have so like if I have a client, I have clients, you know, women of color, and if like their hair, if someone gets their hair braided or something, depending on the relationship, I might say like I like your hair, like whatever. But I try to leave a lot of space around that because hair is loaded, and I'm a white woman. You know, I don't just come to talking about someone's hair in a neutral way.
There's a history there.
Yeah, and like just allowing people to, and it depends on how long I've been working with somebody. If I had someone coming in for the second session who'd changed their hair, I might not say something. You know?
Right.
Yeah, just really quickly, part of what I'm hearing you say, Natasha, is this idea of ownership or feeling like I have to be included. And a lot of times, and I think we're seeing this more and more, that white people in America feel entitled to things. It's my right to have this or do this. And, you know, maybe touching somebody's hair or asking a lot of questions about it is a part of, oh, I want to be in on it too. And, you know, a few minutes ago, actually, I started having a Solange's song, Fubu, Boris Bias, play in my head. And it's just about some things, it's about the fact that some things really are just for Black people or people of, you know, particular backgrounds. And it doesn't always have to be shared. It shouldn't be taken away.
Beautiful. And the last thing that I want to ask Brian to run, and then we're going to need to kind of start to close, is a video of a trailer of a movie that came out a few years ago. And I was just listening to Equal Justice Initiative's Brian Stevenson and Whoopi Goldberg in conversation around representation in the media and the power of the media in terms of creating narratives and creating stories that then infiltrate culture, which infiltrate our minds and our everything from the clinician to the client. And maybe just run this clip really quick on our way out on Black Panther, because this was a movie that people said wasn't really going to, you know, like it would never work. And then of course it broke box office records everywhere. And the kind of counter narrative that could exist that if we use Black joy as a portal to connection and mutual inspiration, that can actually really be quite empowering and quite impressive. So can you run that, Brian?
I've seen men build weapons that I couldn't even imagine. I've seen aliens drop from the sky.
Yeah.
But I have never seen anything like this. How much more are you hiding?
Hold up. Let's go.
We are home. My son, it is your time.
Show me my respect and bow down.
You get to decide what kind of king you are going to be. Don't freeze.
I never freeze.
The revolution will not be televised. Show me my respect and bow down. We own ya. We own ya. We only getting started now, cause we own ya. Everybody think they know me now, cause we own ya. You and I'm my homie now, cause we own ya.
I waited my entire life for this. The world's gonna start over. I'ma burn it all. What happens now determines what happens to the rest of the world.
You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. Wakanda forever! The revolution will not be televised.
Let's have some fun.
The revolution will be live.
All right, the revolution will not be televised. Wakanda forever. I mean, look at us all smiling. I have chills. I think we all kind of have chills, right? How could you not? But the thing that lands there for me is that it's just all the power, all the hope, all the faith, all the tension is there. And this is what happens when you have people able to look through another lens, right? This is a liberation story. And this is really what we want. Collective liberation, like sympathetic joy, is not about less for you and more for me, or none for you. It just means that we get to share. I mean, it's like third grade. So anyway, who else to sort of close out for our time together today? Any parting thoughts, ladies?
I just wanted to say thank you. And I think it's really interesting. In my Zoom screen, I'm like right in the middle. And then I have Francesca right here, Natasha right here, undergirded by like the grounds of like, our, Brian and Dana. And I'm like torn, right? Like I can feel that, like, palpably the tension between this elegant ferocity that you talked about, Francesca, and also this, like, how do we honor each other and understand and do our due diligence and, understand the history and walk, not just be not care, but walk carefully with those around us in our sessions. And as what you were saying, Natasha, and I'm always trying to go, okay, like, where do I, and also the hair thing just kind of made me go, what the hell is up with your hair? Why do you have pink? Now I got to go like deal with that with my therapist too. Right? Like, what
my pink hair?
I was like, thank God I didn't come,
Fabulous.
But, thank you. But all of this, and I'm just, as an individual going, this is so rich, and this is an ever moment by moment kind of walk for me to walk into this elegant ferocity with understanding and compassion and sharing, but asking, do you want to share, with the others around me? So
beautiful.
I take away a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Dana?
Yeah, I'm just feeling a sense of upliftment from coming together and, being able to have this conversation, which I don't think has had enough. And, it covered some things that were difficult. But even, though it, touched on some difficult things, the fact that we, were together trying to sort of address some issues that need to be addressed in the world and in the therapy room, it just feels very encouraging and uplifting for me. And I hope that those of you viewing feel some sense of hope and upliftment.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dana.
Yeah, thank you to all of you, Dana, Francesca, Lynn, Brian. I just feel very grateful to be able to participate in these conversations, because I feel like it's an opportunity really to learn and also to kind of have space to explore ideas together. And it's just very valuable. And I really hope that other people listening and watching are really getting something out of it too.
That's right. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. And again, this is on replay. We'll play, we try to do a live show weekly, but it may be a replay one week or a next week or whatnot. And the conversations vary. So send us your topics, send us your interests, send us what it is that you might like us to talk about. I think that we have microaggressions on the agenda, maybe Karen's to talk a little bit about, but other things too. So whatever it is that may feel right. This is the anti-racism show for therapists, but really anybody can watch, because we're just trying to deal with the issues of our time right now and figure out a way that we can be wise and discerning about what is needed of us in this moment, and how do we have the internal resources to be able to meet it with that elegant ferocity and with joy, and with perhaps some shared Black joy also. Thank you so much for watching Inside Out with Francesca, Natasha and Francesca. I'm Francesca Maximé for all of us here.
Dana
Brian
and
Wesley
Lynn.
Johnson. Yes. Well, right. It's exactly with Brian Wesley Johnson and with Lynn Min and with Dr. Dana Collins as our special guest for the day. Thank you so much to Solivity for producing it for us. And we'll see you next time. Take good care. Be well.
Bye.
Thank you for watching Inside Out with Natasha and Francesca here on Solivity TV every Wednesday at noon. Solivity Magazine brings you the best in inspiration on Solivity TV. Check out our new shows. Mark your calendars for Solivity Magazine